Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to talk basically all of these seasons of Power Rangers so far. There are some of these seasons that I had ultimately had only seen pilot episodes of. There are some seasons that I have seen plenty of episodes of. So more than likely, I'm probably going to give you the rundown of my history with Power Rangers, what all I saw up until a point to where like I saw the original run of, and then eventually I at some point came back, rewatched some episodes, and then further along went into very much watching some Amazon or some just Netflix stuff of Power Rangers to ultimately kind of get up to speed currently to the second of this recording what Power Rangers has to offer, and some of the seasons are actually pretty good, and some of the seasons are like maybe there's something here, or then there's also seasons where it's like this season was garbage. Like basically there was stuff through some of the seasons that they kind of recycled stuff from obviously other movies and or other shows, and I thought that was kind of ridiculous. There is one episode that I don't know exactly which season it comes from. Um, but yeah, I had seen the Forever Red episode. I don't know what episode that season comes from, but I do remember that. I do remember that season, or I do remember that episode. Not the season that it comes from, but I remember that episode. So I've seen Forever Red. I've seen kind of a lot of the bigger Ash-like episodes. There's one episode that I kind of want to like I remember Tommy ending up because I'm a big Tommy fan. So ultimately, there's some people that might hate Tommy. There some people that might be annoyed of him consistently coming back through seemingly every single iteration of Power Rangers. But hey, if the shoe still fits and ultimately people still like him, keep bringing him back. Keep bringing that guy back. Like keep tapering back on to Jason David Frank, because that guy, like, people love him. People still want to see his face on screen. So yeah, just keep coming and bringing him back, because he seems to always be the fan favorite. Of every single time you have a big Power Rangers event, he has to be tied into it somehow. So yeah. So yeah, let's go into what is my original run. Hopefully this thing isn't going to be too long. I think first I'm going to probably pick and choose and tell you like who I thought were probably my favorites at first, and then I'm probably gonna go through my original run and tell you like what I ended up originally seeing on TV, and then when I some stuff that I went back and saw later, and then I'm gonna probably go through like season to season, kind of telling you like, hey, like this is all that I've seen, and this is my kind of opinion on stuff. So reasonably for the certain seasons that end up being later, like the Super Samurais and the Super Ninja Steels and stuff like that, and the Super Mega Forces and the stuff that they kind of double dipped on things. I haven't seen the second seasons of Dino Charge or something like that they have to keep dipping the word super into everything, bizarrely, and they have to kind of keep recycling the same theme song. Like I don't know how many times like they went with the original like Go Go Power Rangers one, and then they keep going with like reiterating like, yeah, it's Go Go Power Rangers, and then they just threw whatever the new word is in there. Like it would just be Go Go Power Rangers, but then it would just be like Shining Steel Megaforce or whatever. Like like he would just be like whatever the random title is in that episode. Like the theme songs got super uncreative like the longer that this thing went along. There's some I'm not going to go out of my way to talk about every theme song of the show, but because there's some that I thought were actually pretty decent, but that's because I actually cared to actually learn the theme songs for some of them, because they were actually good songs. Because once I started to hear like the recycled variation of like the years of when they would do Power Rangers, I'm like, you know what? I'm not gonna listen to a recycled version of the same song for 5 to 6 different seasons. No, it's a recycled version. So first off, let's ultimately at first go into my favorites, the ones that I either saw later on or the ones that I had in an original run of. So obviously, my favorite seasons are Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, who of course I originally got up every Saturday morning to eventually see. Ultimately, watching the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie in theaters. And so ultimately, yeah, that to me, that entire run up to the point to where they get to uh, pretty much up to where they get to Turbo, and I kind of give up after that, and then ultimately uh, we'll get to that. So Mighty Morphin Power Rangers is actually like basically it should always be a thing that you should start out with if you've never seen Power Rangers in your life. Basically, I know that Mighty Morphin Power Rangers realistically is probably the most copy and paste episode that you've probably ever seen in your life. Because when looking back on it, I'm like, man, did they just reuse a lot of footage just over and over and over again? Like, basically, like, how every episode just masterfully craftedly just consistently becomes like a copy and paste of every single episode to an hilarious degree was funny to me, and I thought that was funny. So I watched the original run on TV, and then I went through Amazon later on and rewatched all the way up to Zeo, and yeah, just really good, solid episodes. There's a lot of times when they would individually have individual character episodes, which I thoroughly thought was fun. I think they tried to do that in the much later seasons to kind of bring that back in, where you have individual character episodes, which ultimately just were just awful when they tried that in the later seasons, because reasonably, it just like after a while it like the certain seasons weren't that good with writing, and to ultimately try to taper back to a thing that worked previously and try to put it in your season comes off as you just copying and pasting, obviously. So it's just like, dude, you're trying to taper back on a Power Rangers episode of doing the kind of the same similar things. It's like, no, you need to be your own thing. Because ultimately, like, basically, there's only so many certain ideas where you have to either have like an animal Power Rangers, or you have to have Dino Rangers and this and that. Because how many seasons do we have the word like Dino and or like how many themes do we have for the most point where every single one of these are all some kind of dinosaur or a ninja or a like some kind of just the same things over and over and over again, or cars. That seems to be a consistent theme. But anyways, so yeah, Mighty Morphin to me is a really great series. It's a starting off series. I always got really annoyed when they, like, every single episode that they would try to write out Tommy every single episode when he was the Green Ranger. I was getting so annoyed watching that season back, just seeing every single time that Tommy would have some reason where he couldn't be there, where he'd have some like karate contest he would have to go to, or ultimately like Zordon would just be like, well, I don't know if your powers are gonna hold. So every single episode having Tommy just like having to like begrudgingly just be like, well, yeah, guys, I guess I just can't go out there tonight. I can't fight. Sorry. But ultimately, thank God that they ended up just fusing him into the show, and then ultimately, eventually, fused him into actually being like the leader, because basically he kind of, in a lot of ways, kind of like like a lot of people were ultimately on the camp of, like, basically Tommy, who is the sixth leader, is pretty much like the leader, or should be the leader, or ultimately is the best ranger. So like, why is Jason kind of having to be the leader? Like, even at some points, like, Tommy really does take the reins of being the leader, even away from Rocky when Rocky comes in. Because you can kind of see that slight shift when, like, Jason leaves and Rocky comes in. And let's talk about that weird transition going on with Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, when you would have, when you obviously knew that the other Rangers, Zach, Trini, and Jason were leaving. Oh my God, they would just have numerous episodes where the characters would like have their backs to the camera and just be ultimately just like waving goodbye to Tommy and Kimberly and Billy, because they had to go to somewhere. And they would have to do that numerous times. You would just have to show the back of these characters' heads through numerous episodes, and it made no sense. And then you would just fuse Adam, Rocky, and I think Aisha, because I could be wrong about that name, because more than likely I probably will be wrong about that name. Um, you would fuse them in, and have them do the fighting scenes, and then basically just eventually just give them the keys to the car, because it's just like, well, you guys have been fighting these putties anyways, and like, basically you're doing all the stuff that Jason, Trini, and Zach can't. And then eventually you actually finally had an episode with those three all leaving, and legitimately them leaving, and it was like, okay, send them off finally. But God, those episodes that you had to forcibly like do all that like stupid rigmarole, was just like hilarious to watch. And yeah, recently, I think the best storyline out of Power Rangers, period, is Tommy being evil Green Ranger. That is probably the best story out of all this. And there has never been one season that I think gets anywhere close to that. Nothing, like, if anything, you could kind of taper off as say it's like, well, Cat being the actual literal cat, and her coming in and kind of like underhandingly, like, I guess you could say that that was like quasi like Tommy's Green Ranger moment. But I don't know, like, those moments were actually pretty good, but I think the Tommy's Green Ranger story was better. It's just overall just better. I don't think there's a story like that out there where there's much intrigue or interest or whatever going on. Um, but yeah, so Mighty Morphin Power Rangers was probably my favorite season, going from eventually Tommy ending up being the White Ranger, which ultimately I was just like, okay, like, I still like Tommy, and the White Tiger thing was really cool, even though I was obviously like kind of remiss of not having the Dragon Zord. But now we have the Tiger Zord, which I was ultimately like, yeah, this Zord is pretty cool too, but like, but it's not the Dragon Zord. We're not gonna get that flute in there. Like, man, I wish that White Tiger Tommy would have had a flute just like the Dragon Zord did, but I guess ends up being what it ends up being. So, the next favorite season of mine is probably In Space. There's some interesting things about Zeo, but when looking at it, there's some kind of like there's stuff with Zeo where like bringing Jason back as the Gold Ranger, which obviously I think I figured out that I think Tommy and Jason had some grief together or working together. I think that's the real reason why like Jason wasn't really in the show very often or whatever. I think that they would just butt heads maybe when they were on the show at some point. So like not Jason and Tommy like the actual like characters. No, I'm talking about Jason and Tommy uh like the actual actors, like Jason David Frank and Austin. So yeah, I think Turbo had the Phantom Ranger, which I actually thought was probably the most intriguing thing about that show. But reasonably, I don't think there was enough episodes of the Phantom Ranger, and I don't think they really went anywhere with that. So I liked the Phantom Ranger, but there wasn't anything good enough about that show to keep me interested in that show. The Alien Rangers was kind of like, I think a lot of people say that Alien Rangers is probably their favorite thing, but I could care less about it. So in space to me was bringing back Mighty Morphin Power Rangers to me and the real Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. In space did a lot of because ultimately they brought back Rita, they brought back Zed from time to time and kind of showed them in the foreground. They kind of made it to where it seemed like this show was paying off the fact that I watched any number of these other shows. So I appreciated that this show for that. We also in space had Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from the Next Mutation in this show in one episode. So yeah, I really liked In Space. I thought the Red Ranger being, I think, from actual space. I don't remember what his name is. I think it was like, I know it starts with an A. I know it starts with an A, but I'm trying to figure out what it was. I know, like, they recycled some of the characters from Turbo into In Space because ultimately they realized that people were dropping off after Turbo once they really started to change some people. So I think after Tommy left in Turbo and or ultimately because Tommy left, Adam left, and I think Kat left. I think I was just kind of like, you know what? I think I'm leaving because it's just like I liked Adam. I was a big Adam guy because I liked Adam, and supposedly they were thinking at some point that Johnny Young Bosch was going to be like the new leader of the next team, and he was going to be like the new Adam because ultimately the reason why Adam growing out his hair, like they assumed that maybe Adam was going to be the new Tommy, like the new leader of this team, and but instead, like they basically like didn't go with that. They're just like, well, we're just gonna have new people come in, and so I think that's where Adam was just like, well, okay, well then I'm gone then. Like, if you're not gonna make me the new leader, and I'm obviously the most experienced person on this team, then goodbye. To where I think when Johnny came back later, and I think the Overdrive episode, that's why they made him the leader because obviously he's the most experienced like guy on that team. He's been Morphin for the longest. So In Space to me was great. I really loved In Space and like the whole like Power Rangers actually being on a ship thing was really fun to me. So my next favorite is going to be quite a bit of a jump from a couple seasons. I really loved Power Rangers Dino Thunder. Power Rangers Dino Thunder is probably right up with Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Probably Mighty Morphin Power Rangers is my probably favorite of all time episode. Dino Thunder is second. and then probably In Space is kind of after that. Dino Thunder also has Jason David Frank in it. Why do you think that I probably liked it? It basically, like, I liked the very first pilot episode of Power Rangers Dino Thunder because you have Jason David Frank that is repetitively just running around in the scene telling the Power Rangers what to do, and I found that hilarious. Um, Basically, you have just a couple of Power Rangers in this episode. You have it to be Jason David Frank comes back as, I would say, the Black Ranger. You would have um, you would have a Red Ranger, a Blue Ranger, a Yellow Ranger, and then I think you would have a White Ranger. So that's five. So you wouldn't have like a sixth Ranger unless I'm lost anywhere. But yeah, Dino Thunder to me was actually really fun. The writing on this was kind of very clever. Basically, having Tommy be unconscious and have his dream of him having to fight out every single one of his old Power Ranger personas was awesome. Having him fight the green, the white, the Zeo Ranger, and ultimately he never fought his Turbo Ranger because technically, I think Tommy handing the Turbo helmet off to, I think, TJ ultimately cements that, like, that was TJ's helmet. That ultimately Tommy handing Turbo off to that new Red Ranger basically was just like, hey, that's your helmet, that's not mine. Even though still Tommy was Turbo Red Ranger within the movie and stuff like that, but still, uh, that's just my thought process. So I really loved Power Rangers Dino Thunder. I thought that it was really good, especially the pilots, the early episodes. But then there's some kind of intermittent episodes that I thought were really fun. Um, and yeah, the next episode or the next season that I actually really did enjoy was Power Rangers SPD. So kind of back to back, pretty good seasons. So reasonably, we have it to where like Power Rangers is not just kind of any kind of normal Power Rangers. They're kind of like they're kind of on this like patrol-ish like thing. Bizarrely, you have these like this SWAT team like Power Rangers where every single one of them have the Power Rangers in space helmets, which I thought were bizarre. But then you also have like a patrol, like a Power Rangers that ultimately has like numbers all on their uniforms as to like tell you that okay, Red Ranger is number one, Green Ranger is two, and so on and so forth. The only thing that I thought was very annoying about SPD is the numerous times when they would have to exceedingly introduce themselves every single time when they would morph. They would have to tell you that they're Red Ranger 1 or they're they're Blue Ranger 3 or 2, and that got really annoying to ultimately every single time have to tell you what number they were, what color they were, and which ranger they were and this and that every single time. I got super annoyed with that in SPD. But ultimately, when you would have the sixth ranger that ultimately was the, of course, the dog ranger that was ultimately, I think his number was number 100. I was like, yeah, that was so much fun to me, and I really enjoyed SPD. And you actually had some characters in this show that were actually funny. Sky was such uh, a character that like was really this guy that really had a stick up somewhere, and so reasonably, yeah, like I liked all the characters. I could really invest in them, and so yeah, I really liked SPD. Yeah, those are probably four out of all these seasons were probably my favorites. I think that there are some potential ones, and I'm going to bring those up. And there's probably ultimately some garbage seasons, which ultimately I'm going to bring up as well. So, because ultimately there's some here that I have not seen yet, but I think there are some potentials there. So let's ultimately kind of break some of these seasons down fairly quickly. The ones that I didn't say were overall my big favorites, and ultimately just kind of run through them and just kind of mention like, okay, through some pilot watching, I'm like, this show looks like garbage, or from some other means and stuff like that, we're gonna kind of like mention some of these seasons. So let's bring up Alien Rangers. That has to be its own season, bizarrely. So you have Power Rangers that ultimately are turned into young kids, and ultimately you have them find the Zeo crystals. You know what? I liked the Alien Rangers, but I didn't like the younger Rangers. I thought that was just dumb to shrink the kids to be much younger. I thought that whole premise was just dumb to me. I liked the Alien Rangers, but I didn't like the younger kids. I just thought it was just dumb to me. Zeo. Zeo is kind of like a lukewarm kind of like it's a thumbs up, but it's not one of those where I'm ultimately just going, yeah, it was like I really, if anything, the best season that I can remember from Zeo was when Tommy got brainwashed and ultimately had to fight. I think he had to fight the Gold Ranger. I think, or he had to fight one of the Rangers in this like gladiator-ish like episode. Basically, probably in my eyes, that's probably the best episode that I remember out of Zeo. Or when Jason ends up becoming the Gold Ranger is probably the best episode. But other than that, like for Zeo, like to me, like there's there's realistically nothing that really ultimately stands out for me that I really enjoyed through Zeo. That I'm like, yeah, big thumbs up to Zeo. Like it's just kind of a thumbs up, but it's good enough compared to probably Turbo. It's good enough. So yeah, Turbo again. Basically, once you have the Phantom Ranger, after that, who cares? Basically, when you mix in Turbo and you have a kid be a Power Ranger, which ultimately the Power Ranger, when he morphs, turns into an adult size Power Ranger, I think really just that got to a lot of people as just that is so stupid. It should have been you have a kid be a Ranger and that kid be a kid Power Ranger, and that would have worked. Not, okay, when this kid morphs, he turns into Shazam. No, that's not how that should have went. Everybody was joking about that for I don't know how long, and that was the dumb thing about that. In Space is freaking great. You have a conclusion to Zordon's story, and ultimately that story was great. Everything about it was just like, oh my god, this show is awesome. Lost Galaxy. Lost Galaxy just kind of feels like a hodgepodge of just really just like there's a lot of awful visuals going on in this show. There's a lot of rehashing of just like, hey, let's bring like Star Trek Trooper helmets in here. Let's bring up some stuff. Like this is where we kind of get like some really just like some garbage story and some garbage like stuff going on here. I think the only thing that I liked about this show was that there was actually a character called Joel who was a green Power Ranger, and I think that's all that I think stuck with me through that show was ultimately just be like, yeah, hey, there's a guy that shares my name, and that was about it. And anything else going on with Lost Galaxy is just a lost cause because ultimately, I don't think I'll ever really go into this show and really watch it. Like, really, you have the swords in the very beginning of the show that were stuck into the stone, like King Arthur and Merlin, like that kind of story. And I just thought that was really dumb. There's some probably attractive looking actresses or actors in this show, but that's about it. Lightspeed Rescue. I've kind of not exactly seen like the entire run of Lightspeed Rescue. Every time that I would probably pop in to see a Lightspeed Rescue episode, I actually probably enjoyed it. I know I probably watched the Titanium Ranger episode, and I think that probably sticks out more than anything. To see that journey, to see that episode, I really liked that more so than anything else. I probably, once I heard there was a Titanium Ranger in that episode or in that season, I probably really hung on to find out about the Titanium Ranger and kind of find out his story, because it was kind of really interesting to me to see a Titanium Ranger, because I guess that's kind of a clickbaiting thing. Like, hey, yeah, but we got a Titanium Ranger. Ooh, wow, ooh, yeah, that sounds exciting. So, Time Force. Time Force, just basically just give whatever actors you can just toss into this thing. Time Force, I think, was the one where you had the villain where he would like pull like bones out of his body and they would turn into blades, I think. But maybe I'm probably confusing that with Lost Galaxy. But Time Force, the villain looks like garbage. The villains look like garbage. The show just like doesn't look good enough to me to want to know everything about Time Force. So ultimately, more than likely, somebody might. Thanks, phone, for calling while I'm doing something. Hopefully that doesn't pop up to be like, oh yeah, copyrighted. But yeah, so Time Force to me was because I don't want to spend the time to have to realistically do this whole thing over. So Time Force to me was just garbage. I didn't care about that show, and I don't think I'm ever gonna go in and watch that show ever. It looks dumb to me. So let's go into Wild Force. Saw the pilot episode. Don't think I really like. I think there might be something interesting about Wild Force, but when looking at it, it just seems like the way they go about doing this pilot, where they basically already had 4 actors and then they add in the leader, I thought was kind of just dumb. And because I seen the pilot episode, and ultimately how they approach the Zords in this show, where you have like Zords that were already pre-existing, and yeah, just like Wild Force was just kind of, that was so just to me. Like I ultimately liked the whole approach of having animals in here, because when looking at it, I think the Blue Ranger is a shark Power Ranger, and I think that's the only thing that I like about this show, where you had like a shark Power Ranger, even though like his design looks kind of goofy and kind of cheap. Still, to me, like I think that was the thing that stuck out to me, where I was like, ooh yeah, like a Shark Ranger, that actually seems like really awesome and really cool. But anything else about this show was just, it was just, I don't know. Wild Force doesn't exactly have anything that comes to me that's like, I need to fully fledgedly watch this show. Let's move on. Power Rangers Ninja Storm. Was this show a joke? Was this show one of those where it's like somebody was like, dude, you know what? Power Rangers is never going to do a show about this. And Power Rangers was like, hold my beer. Yeah, we are. So Ninja Storm is a garbage heap of a show. This to me probably looks like the worst Power Rangers show I have ever seen. Because when looking at this pilot episode, I have to just laugh my way through this thing. So here's what happens in this pilot episode. So they're doing some crouching tiger, hidden dragon like stuff in this pilot episode. People are basically barely walking on water. People are basically supposedly flying through the air esh like trees, maybe. Everything looks crouching tiger, hidden dragon-esque, but not in that kind of pay scale or way or approach. Basically, we have a bunch of characters that are either surfers or skateboarders or some other third guy that I don't remember what he actually does, because who cares within this show? Like, recently you got a bunch of people that sound like Keanu Reeves that are like, bah, yeah, hey, awesome, cool waves. Like, that's what everybody sounds like in this show that are the Power Rangers. Like, to me, they sound like quasi Keanu Reeves at some points. Because they're all like, I think they're all like Valley people, maybe. And we have all these three rangers that are going to this karate dojo, and they consistently come in there late. And then the one time that, of course, again they are late, their entire dojo ends up getting ransacked by some villainish like character and destroyed, to the point to where forcibly now they have to become Power Rangers because a talking hamster tells them to. A talking hamster tells them to become Power Rangers. And I'm just like, what is this episode? What is this show? This show is awful. This show is just god awful. And reasonably, to any point, I would never watch anything beyond the first episode of this because God was it bad. And I watched it fairly recently too. Yeah, these second tier episodes, all recent watching. I never watched them when the original run came up or anything. These are all Netflix watches. Uh, Dino Thunder I caught on Amazon and it was good. So yeah, SVD caught on Amazon. It was actually really good. Mystic Force. So I only caught the pilot episode of Mystic Force, and I know there's a story arc going on in Mystic Force, so maybe I reasonably want to go back and watch Mystic Force to see the story arc and see how this entangles, because I only got to see one very goofy looking Power Ranger, which to me looked very goofy. She had like a snowflake on the top of her like Power Rangers helmet. It was goofy. Um, Reasonably within, like, was Mystic Force like them trying to copy and paste some kind of like Harry Potter thing going on? Because good God, they had like the Harry Potter theme playing in the background. I swear to God. And like they were trying to like do like a portion of the Harry Potter theme in this show, which seemed weird. And reasonably within this show, it was basically like everything of like sorcerers. Like the Power Rangers were originally sorcerers, and they were all like people with wands and stuff like that. Like everything was desperately trying to be just like Harry Potter. It was ridiculous. When going into this pilot episode, I thought that there might have been maybe some good like things maybe trying to be done here, but it heavily came off as every like wizard or witch kind of show that has ever been done. Like at some kind of points in here, it kind of has like some goofy comedic relief to me that kind of comes off as like even like Sabrina the Teenage Witch to me. For some of this, it's like very just it's kind of very off-putting to me at some points. So reasonably, if people really like Mystic Force, I will probably go out of my way to try to say that I watched it at some point. But Mystic Force, what a goofy show. It seemed very copy and paste of Harry Potter. Operation Overdrive. Reasonably, Operation Overdrive basically to me is really summed up via me watching one episode of when Johnny Young Bosch comes back onto the show and is a leader of several other Power Rangers that ultimately had been through other seasons. Like I think the Green Ranger from Mystic Force is also on this show with Johnny Young Bosch as this team. Reasonably within Operation Overdrive, I was thinking about watching like the pilot episode leading up to when Johnny comes back. But when I first watched the pilot episode of Operation Overdrive, I completely gave up and just went straight to the Johnny Young Bosch episode because recently, like, I didn't care for this cast. Recently, I liked maybe the sixth Ranger that ends up coming into this episode, the Unique Ranger. I don't remember if there is actually six Rangers in this episode in this season because I only watched like really just the guest appearance of Johnny Young Bosch and caught the pilot episode, which I don't think I even remember if I watched the entire thing or not, because ultimately Operation Overdrive was just it was rough. It was a rough show. Jungle Fury. So Jungle Fury to me seems like an actually like it seems like a decent like concept. It seems like a decent concept going into this show, but the Power Rangers themselves look awful. Like the design of the Power Rangers look awful. Basically, it's another animal kind of show, but they're trying to use unique animals that they haven't used before, and that really heavily comes off. So, if anything, I think kind of maybe the villains are interesting in this show, but really going into this, that's all that you really have is just like, well, yeah, the villains are interesting in the show, but the Power Rangers themselves look awful, and those are the characters you're going to be seeing consistently. If anything, I think Jungle Fury, I think tapers off of. Yeah, I think Jungle Fury tapers off of kind of like a oh god, which one was it? It kind of tapers off the Ninja Storm kind of like story. But then I think Jungle Fury eventually goes into these kids ending up at a pizza parlor, I think, for Jungle Fury. Realizing that I will probably get Jungle Fury mixed up with probably Wild Force, because ultimately they feel like the exact same thing, even though they're not. So yeah, Jungle Fury seems like it kind of has something there, but I could not really care. So yeah, that's all I want to say about that episode. So now we're going to RPM. RPM. Whew, RPM. Reasonably for that, RPM. It has some characters that you can actually invest in. You could probably actually care in their story, but I don't care of when you actually get to the point of when the people morph into the Power Rangers segment. It seems like the visuals that appeal to when these people become Power Rangers are maybe to be for toddlers. Like, I think it's a very young look for a young audience, like a very young audience, like appeal. But the story is just like, it feels like another like kind of a post-apocalyptic like world where ultimately you have these this story of people in desperation and stuff like that. And so, yeah. Oh, maybe Jungle Fury is one of those where I thought it was like a very goofy concept, and like it kind of had that like the Last Dragon kind of feel, where ultimately you have you have ninjas that are all going to eventually have to like live with a mom and pop like thing. So yeah, maybe that's what I thought. Maybe Jungle Fury probably wasn't as good as I thought it was, because I know there's actually some story. Maybe that's Dino Charge. Yeah, maybe Dino Charge maybe has the thing of which I'm talking about. Um, yeah, Jungle Fury is awful. Jungle Fury is pretty much awful all around. That's my consensus about Jungle Fury. It has a stupid concept. It really is a story of who cares. So probably skip Jungle Fury because this show has awful visuals. RPM, basically kind of the same thing. It has you can invest in some of the characters, especially the Black Ranger, but ultimately when you get into this show, it's a boatload of like I don't care for the RPM Power Rangers. Like their visuals are kind of not all that great or are too simplistic. They're just it's very rough. Moving on. Power Rangers Samurai. So recently, I haven't seen Super Samurai, but I think I know what happens in the very first pilot of Super Samurai. I know that eventually, I think the leader ends up changing hands to a female, I think maybe. I could be wrong about that. I know Samurai eventually they change to have a female leader, which is great. So Power Rangers Samurai, I think, is overall a thumbs up show to me. Um, I think it's kind of goofy to actually have uh, the whole like they have to draw out when they morph. They actually have to literally draw out like lettering and stuff like that. Um, Not because it's like oh well that's only because it's like Japanese writing and they have to do that. No, I just think that the whole like process of doing that just seems kind of goofy. The whole morphing thing just seems kind of goofy to me in Samurai, but other than that, I think overall there's great visuals here. There's a really great story. I think every I think probably Power Rangers Samurai is probably an actual show that I'll actually probably go into and watch all the way through because I actually think it actually has good story and I actually think it is legitimately an actual good show to have people watch. Uh Super Samurai, I think, is still on that same motion of giving you a good show. So I think that's probably why they also did a boatload of actual movies because I think where a lot of people jumped off at a lot of points, I think Samurai brought a lot of people back. So yeah, Megaforce kind of like I think really Megaforce kind of clickbaited people kind of to watch this show again because knowing Megaforce and Super Megaforce has that like legendary battle thing within it, and I think reasonably, I think at some points they might have used probably previous Rangers to come back, maybe to just kind of allude to something, uh, or ultimately to tell people right off the gate that there's going to be some big Power Rangers battle within this show. Kind of a underhanded thing to do, but when looking at it it's just like man we want to get people back into like keeping them here and some people might have just like Megaforce doesn't exactly have really great story. I've seen quite a few episodes of Megaforce. I know that there's like a robot ranger that gets added, like Robo Ranger, which ultimately he comes off as very much RoboCop-esh like, and so like I think there's some good things about that and there's some bad things about that. But reasonably with Megaforce, like I think I don't think I can invest in any of the Rangers. I just want to like I hope uh that I just get to the point to where I see them morph to something. I do know, I think that Megaforce, eventually you have it to where I think in Super Megaforce, I think that's when there's a lot of episodes where they kind of just, or there's probably episodes where they're just starting to consistently morph into other Rangers, which I think could appetize a lot of people to wet their whistle to just see certain other kind of Rangers in action. I have seen quite a barrage of kind of YouTube-esh like fights out of uh, Megaforce, where I've seen the Megaforce characters morph into other different seasons of Power Rangers. So yeah, Super Megaforce is, or Megaforce and Super Megaforce is like just wait for the battles, because who cares about the actual story? Because when looking at it, I could not invest in any of the actual Power Rangers characters, but I could invest in when eventually I could see when they morph in and fight people, and I thought that was actually good. Everything else about this show, besides the fighting part, when the characters were out of scene, I thought that that was actually like to actually see any of the characters do their lines, or I didn't care about their stories. It's pretty awful. But the like the evening out is just the Power Ranger part. Dino Charge. So Dino Charge, I think Dino Charge does have a really good idea. I think overall to have a villain who is a who was kind of like a collector and or a that ended up like taking all of these villainish like characters, collecting them, and then eventually ending up um, I think stuck on Earth because of the dinosaur asteroid hit, and then the ice age, and this and that, and then ultimately several years later, I guess eventually just being unthawed and this and that, and so really actually a pretty good concept overall. I think probably the best villain idea overall compared to a lot of the other seasons, because a lot of the other seasons it's just they didn't really build up the villains good enough. They would just show up and appear, and otherwise you would just be like, yeah, this looks like some kind of villain that I need to care about. Why? Like, I think this one was probably had a very good build for the villain. Um, Plus, I just think a lot of the other villain kind of storylines were most of the time just garbage. Because recently there was sometimes where you had to like forcibly tie a character to the villain, um, to ultimately make sense of a lot of things. That ultimately the villain was an actual person at some point, but then he was changed or whatever. Uh, I think we at some point there was one season. God, I don't know what season it is. I'm frustrated now. There's one season where you'd ultimately have like villains that were mutations, that were like mutated villains. Man, I actually think that those stories were actually pretty good, like villain setup wise. I think that was probably Megaforce, where you would have Megaforce and it would be like stuff about pollution, which I thought was kind of like, but I liked the fact that Megaforce had like mutant villains that I thought were actually pretty good to me, writing wise, to write those things in there. Um, but yeah, but Dino Charge had this like bounty hunter-ish like villain that was kind of like there during prehistoric times, and then ultimately had the hiding of the Power Rangers energy through certain dinosaurs. So I thought that was a good setup of villain. Kind of the setting up of the Power Rangers, you can take it or leave it, because ultimately it kind of gets to the point in the later Power Rangers seasons where like the actors are garbage. They just are. because it's like it's not the problem of the actors, it's not their fault, it's just the material is just not at all trying to be like it already realizes that it's a successful thing, so it doesn't need to be actually like clever, or it doesn't need to have like it just needs to do the same old stuff that it's been doing for I don't know how long, to just keep pushing a product out there that is just kind of just, subpar. um Ninja Steel. So Ninja Steel to me ultimately feels like a show that has a like it feels like it like looks and appears like a grand scale ish like thing that they spend a lot of time putting monsters in there for extra, like for an extra just little ditty little scene. And I guess I could appreciate that this show for that. I think some of the story is kind of interesting. But that's kind of like there's a tug and pull of just saying that this story could be good, but when also looking at it, there's a lot of clunky things about this. At some point, this show kind of does come off as like a Guardians of the Galaxy kind of thing. When you have the one kid that has to go off, just being uh, captured by some villain to eventually escape, to eventually try to escape with the crystal that has all the morphers on it. Mm, mm. By the way, there's some morphers that are on these shows that are kind of garbage to me. Like it kind of gets to the point where I think some of the most of the morphers are really garbage looking. Kind of some kind of going to being just cell phones, and like I thought that those stupid like the Wild Force morphers were kind of stupid looking. So let's talk about the morphers. Let's talk quickly garbage about the morphers. Mighty Morphin's morphers, iconic. Alien Rangers, pass, I guess. Zeo with the whole like the two devices on their wrists. I think that was kind of like that was fun. It was kind of fun to ultimately see them use them all the time. Turbo, where you had to like shift it into turbo, you had to do that line every single time. I thought that was kind of a. I guess that's. I guess that's kind of goofy. It's kind of a goofy thing that you had to have like a key go into the morpher, and you had to have this like this weird thing that they would have to like forcibly like do this at first. And they would have to like do this weird hand gesture like things in space. When you had that like dial up like morpher, I think that thing was kind of okay. Like it was kind of fun to see the one, the two, the three, and the whatever, and like the like I thought that morpher was kind of just okay, even though it was kind of backpedaling off of the like the wrist morpher and this and that. uh Kind of through a bulk of whatever these seasons were, I could care less about those morphers, like because I didn't care much about the visuals of the Power Rangers. Wild Force with the phone was kind of goofy. Ninja Storm, where they had to have like the catchphrase of the they'd have the catchphrase, and then ultimately I think the yellow guy forgot what the or the one guy forgot what the catchphrase was. Or no, wait, maybe that was because I'm probably getting another one of those. I'm probably getting a Jungle Fury and Ninja Storm probably confused. Jungle Fury, I think one of the guys couldn't get the morphing right, but I think the Yellow Ranger in Ninja Storm, he couldn't figure out what the catchphrase was. That he ultimately had, I think he got like half of it right. Um, so yeah, uh, Jungle Fury had just some like off shooting like character that like was like mucking everything up. So yeah, like those Ninja Storm and Jungle Fury. Dino Thunder, the Morphers were just kind of like, they kind of still wristband esh like things. I thought that they were just kind of like okay, they were passable to me. SBD actually made sense to me to actually have the Morphers they did. Mystic Force was I'm not sure yet. I'm giving them like a barely passing, like, I only saw one person morph and I didn't care about it. Operation Overdrive, I didn't get a full immersion of them morphing, neither did I care. Jungle Fury, who cares? RPM, who cares? Samurai, it looks like their like morphers looked ugly. The morphers looked like, whew, wow, yeah. I think Jungle Fury had like sunglasses in their morphers. They had to like bop their sunglasses and then do like this weird. Jungle Fury is all kinds of awful. Samurai, yeah, I think the morphers for Samurai were just, they looked ugly, but like everything else with that movie, with that show besides the morphers were passable to me. Megaforce, reasonably, like, bizarrely, they would keep consistently throw out this like bizarrish like card thing. Every single time with Megaforce, there was like these cards being introduced, and I thought that that was just kind of weird to ultimately see a actual literal card being in a lot of this stuff, where you would have to literally, when you would morph, like, hopefully you don't forget that card because you're going to be using it for the rest of your life. So it was kind of interesting to, like, I think a lot of Megaforce does get a big pass for me because it kind of tries to go back and backpedal to try to be like Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, like, especially if you watch the pilot episode of Megaforce, like, it tries to be like Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. It really does. Like, I think it kind of like tapers back to try to be like to have like a Zordon and like alpha like character, so it kind of, it wins me over in that aspect. But yeah, so we have like the morphers with cards, but and then like Dino Charge. I guess like Dino Charge is just kind of like a quasi just goofy again morpher. Ninja Steel, ultimately they have that like, a lot of stuff about Ninja Steel looks like goofy. Like, I don't like the Zords. The Zords look like the Morphers, and the Morphers don't look all that great either. It's stupid looking. To be brutally honest, for most of the point, Ninja Steel is just stupid looking. But eventually, maybe it'll grow into being something seemingly legitimately awesome to eventually watch at some point. But like, from my first impression of one episode of Ninja Steel, I'm like, I don't think I ever really want to, like, if anything, like, Ninja Steel kind of, to me, kind of feels at some point like Lost Galaxy, or like, it kind of has some Lost Galaxy vibes to me. And so I'm like, oof, like, I don't know about Ninja Steel. Ugh, this looks pretty bad. Beast Morphers, Power Rangers Beast Morphers, their latest installment, that again has a cluster of Power Rangers that, to me, honestly remind me much more of Beetleborgs. And basically, at some point, Beetleborgs was in the Forever Red episode, but then also overall, like, I don't. Let me know whoever knows, because more than likely somebody's going to YouTube it, or somebody probably like has seen Power Rangers to the Heavens, and they'll probably tell me the Forever Red episode was in this season. It's episode whatever. Go ahead and watch it so that way you can remember that it's this Power Ranger that ties into Forever Red, because that's Like overall, that's how thick of how much like just every other Ranger was like overpowering in that one episode. It was crazy to me. So Power Rangers Beast Morphers, with that pilot episode, watching that, I'm like, we have it to be it like feeling like the power grid is some kind of mad scientist experiment that ultimately it's like, well, hey, don't you touch that morphing grid. Like, don't get around that area. It's dangerous. It's like a toxic waste dump. I'm like, ultimately, you have it to where the mayor of this show doesn't want anybody going anywhere near that morphing grid, and he doesn't want Power Rangers to be on this show because ultimately he knows full well that once you have Power Rangers in this world, immediately you're going to have like Rita Repulsors and Rita Repulsas and Stags and all these other kind of villainish like characters that are all going to come and come for the Rangers. So and leave this town in complete destruction and this and that. So we also have a very much goofy a lot of things going on with the Rangers where ultimately there's like one Ranger that has to like have a power to give him bigger muscles, which I thought was bizarre. Because I think he has like a gorilla power or something. Like you also have a girl with cheetah powers, and I'm like, oh my god, this is like so goofy to have these Rangers, and they have to have gimmicks and stuff like that to make people come to the show. It's very goofy looking. It makes like the entire pilot. I'm like, God, this looks like so like the pilot was really long and drawn out, anyways. But on top of that, it's kind of like this show kind of feels very like it's been done before to me. Um, even for a Power Ranger show, like I'm talking like this show looks like any other show you've ever seen in your life when it comes down to like a superhero-esh like show. This feels like a superhero-esh like show that's been done to death. It doesn't feel like it's a Power Ranger show that's been done to death. It just feels like a superhero show in general done to death. So ultimately people might like Beast Morphers. I'm just like I'll taper back into the much older content. Um, but yeah, SPD and Dino Thunder, man, are those like back to back pretty good shows. Um, so is Mighty Morphin, even though it's like I think Dino Thunder and SPD are really good shows because you forget that it's one of those like copy and paste ish like shows. You kind of forget if anything that it's a copy and paste kind of thing going on. Where Mighty Morphin Power Rangers is blatantly obvious that it's copy and paste. When going into these, like yeah, you just kind of see the same kind of scenes regurgitated because ultimately a lot of these like things are just kind of shot over and over again, and of course you get like you don't get the same actors playing both roles because of course you got to have it to be where it's like okay the people like the people that are the actual Japanese Rangers, like those probably the people that actually did like some of the actual moves and stuff like that. But yeah, so yeah, recently at some point, like I think with Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, like I think they did kind of separate the two, like the Japanese Power Rangers from this show because I think before they kind of recycled a lot of footage from Power Rangers, but then like man, once these things kind of really tapered off, like they probably did reuse some footage from the Japanese versions, but like I think the American like thing kind of became its own thing. And yeah, so to where like I think they legitimately like shot a lot of the stuff like in New Zealand, because ultimately there's a lot of references of New Zealand through some of these shows and stuff like that. So yeah, it gets to the point where I think they like casted the show legitimately in New Zealand, and they've just kind of been doing that consistently. Where it's like you have the same actors from New Zealand, and this like it kind of comes off as just like okay, we're kind of giving up, really having to like we have these kinds of people for this show, and that's all we're gonna do. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say about Power Rangers. So it's kind of like a bottle time thing in time because ultimately Beast Morphers is now a thing. We're gonna eventually see what happens with any more Power Ranger stuff. I haven't even talked about any of the movies because I think I'll do those like legitimately by themselves. Because I haven't talked about the Power Rangers movie, the Bryan Cranston Power Rangers movie. I haven't reviewed that yet, which I'm will probably come down the pipeline somewhere of me going and re-reviewing a movie that I'd seen in theaters, which honestly I thought was actually good. So for the Power Rangers movie with Bryan Cranston in it, it's a thumbs up for the story, but the visuals of that movie, good God, are the visuals awful, just awful down, like like with all the layers of visuals that it gives you, like everything to do with Power Rangers, like the command center or whatever they call that thing that the Power Rangers go into in that movie, awful. Alpha, awful. Zordon, awful. Um, Bryan Cranston, good, but Zordon, awful. uh, Basically, when they morph, their characters, awful. Villain, awful. Uh, Villain also recycled from just the original thing. You would have thought they would have started out with this movie with probably Zed. Zed instead of Rita to just kind of shift things up. To just be like, yeah, we're gonna give you Zed right away. Or ultimately, you would have thought that the first villain would have maybe been Zed, and but I think reasonably they probably didn't want to go to the Avengers Infinity War route with this first Power Rangers movie because I think if Zed would be in a Power Rangers sequel movie, obviously Zed would win and the Power Rangers would lose. To where within the next movie they would have to come up with some kind of better strategy to finally beat Zed. But yeah, obviously it would be a Infinity War strategy where Zed would win and the Power Rangers would lose, just because that would be something people wouldn't be expecting for the Power Rangers to lose. So yeah, that's all that I think I'm going to say about Power Rangers. If ultimately you want a more in-depth thing about any of these seasons, if you want me to review any singular one of these seasons, more than likely a lot of people would ultimately want me to review Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. I could probably talk about a couple of the episodes. That ultimately I like. If you want individual me talking about certain kind of just series and stuff like that, I will do that. Because Mighty Morphin is huge. There's a ton of seasons. There's a ton of episodes. I can probably go through and talk about to you and talk about, especially considering this movie tie into that, how I felt about. I have the movie reviewed. I think I don't know if it's on this channel or not, but eventually it'll be coming to this channel. So yeah, that'll be in the can. So yeah, more than likely, probably I should have when this will probably drop, which I think won't be the day of which I'm recording it, because I already have stuff on the line. So I'll probably take this and I'll take the Power Rangers movie and put it out on the same day. So if Power Rangers movie isn't already on this channel, then it will be. I'm just kind of figuring it out. So um, I'm not sure if or not the review of this movie is already on this thing, but it will be. So it'll be there. So um, it'll be on this channel eventually. So yeah, it's gonna be a thing. So if you're looking for other Power Rangers stuff, ultimately, if this this video really does well, then that'll let me know to keep going and doing Power Ranger stuff. But at the end of the day, I think that's all I want to say about Power Rangers things, because I'm spending well over an hour talking about Power Rangers. And so ultimately, if you guys don't know, I have a gaming channel that ultimately is covering Power Rangers Legacy Wars. If you're coming to this channel and don't know, I have a gaming channel as well. Grim Death Games. Ultimately, I'm probably going to link down below, hopefully, a video of probably part 1 of Power Rangers Legacy Wars. I have so many videos that I'm putting out right now. Ultimately, there's probably a lot of stuff that I'm just putting through the pipeline. So reasonably, if there's not a link down there, I'll probably link it down there. But because yeah, I'm gonna probably have that be a series, because it seems like the first part is doing really well, better than I thought it would be doing. So I guess we're gonna do a 2-parter of that one, or keep going until people will lose interest. So I'm gonna get out of here because I've spent too much time talking about Power Rangers. Maybe no one cares. So, plus I'm talking about like in general. Like I'm not going and going. Yeah, like episode 1 of 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 2 of this of that. So it's kind of general talk. I liked a lot of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers episodes. If you want me to do an exclusive review of that, I will do so. Kind of like, if anything, I'll even go through episode to episode, because those episodes are really fun. I know Morphin Mania is covering Power Rangers episode to episode as well. They are doing it at a commentary like base. So Morphin Mania is a Geekvolution adjacent channel, which ultimately I had subscribed to Geekvolution as well. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say about Power Rangers right now. I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.